Project 2025 is on a mission to dismantle the Department of Education and introduce voucher programs that will cripple public schools. This isn't just a theory, it's a blueprint for educational inequality. We must resist Project 2025. We don't need to hype up how radical Project 2025 is. It's laid out right in the text. Their plan to gut public schools and push voucher programs is a disaster waiting to happen. We're going to walk you through this step by step because to defeat Project 2025, we must actively resist it. And at the end of this video, we'll give you specific steps to do just that. But first, go to your preferred social media channels, search for Turn Left PAC, and subscribe. You have to see our Resist Project 2025 Reel series. Well, joining me today is Rhonda Solis. Rhonda has served on local school boards and the State Board of Education. She knows firsthand how Project 2025, with its push for voucher programs, will hurt public schools. Rhonda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. What is the real agenda behind efforts like Amendment 80, and how do they connect to the broader national plans like Project 2025 to dismantle public education?
So that's a really good question, John. In Colorado, may have been seeing people gathering signatures for what was called Initiative 138. They did gather enough signatures, which means it made it to the ballot. It'll be on the ballot in November. And on the ballot, it's going to be Amendment 80, 80. So what this is a way of kind of sneaking by people who really do believe in choice, which that has been a big thing in Colorado, and lots of people have supported, which we have right now. We have choice right now. But by putting it on the ballot and actually changing the Colorado Constitution and putting it in there, that opens up the door for vouchers and privatization, which I really feel from where the energy of even putting this on the ballot came from. That is the goal, is voucher and privatization. And you can connect that to Project 2025 as we dismantle public education and really open up the door for taxpayer money to be used for private education, which many of these are in religious institutions. So we have seen Project 2025 over and over again talk about religion and what the idea of family is and what that box is and what kind of people don't fit in that in their eyes.
So, this Proposition 138, Amendment 80, it isn't just about school choice. It seems that it's about diverting public funding to private and charter schools, similar to how Project 2025 plans to introduce voucher programs that will starve public schools of critical resources. Um, with the push for more charter schools and voucher programs, what do you see as the potential consequences for public education in local districts?
I think it's really a concern. I think we have done a good job of talking about, different opportunities for kids. And let's be very clear, it's opportunity for some kids. And some families have really benefited from that. We've seen some great charters in Colorado do some really good work in areas that are, really concerning and have challenging districts, or and maybe they don't even have a school district. Some of our Native American areas have had charters, which have really, helped in the education realm, K-12, and so there are benefits to that. I do think, though, we're at a time that we could have a really good conversation of what that balance looks like. Obviously, charters are not going to go away, and nobody wants them to. But I do think it's advantageous for us as a state and communities to really look and think about what education is supposed to be, what we want it to look like, and what those different choices look like. Charters have filled voids in certain areas, but then in some areas they've actually pushed out traditional public ed and neighborhood schools. So I think as a state, knowing that this kind of plays out differently depending on where you live in the state, I think it's a good time for us to take a pulse and to really have some good conversations around what we want choice to actually be and look like, what that looks like in the future. But what we have seen over the years, specifically in Colorado, is people saying no to vouchers. But with Amendment 80, they never mention the word voucher. Their whole thing is just choice because they know that Coloradoans have bought into that conversation. We've experienced it. We like it. We want to hold on to it. It's kind of like, when we talked about, healthcare, and when we talked about this other option, and people are like, no, I don't want you to, get rid of mine. This isn't going to take away choice in Colorado. There's too many families and voters that really support it, so it's not going to go anywhere. The difference is changing it in the actual Constitution. That will open up the door for vouchers. And when we say vouchers, that's tax money that could be used for private institutions. And what we've seen in other areas like Arizona is it really doesn't help the educational system. And a lot of those private institutions actually raise their fees. So they're still making even more money, as people who are already, affluent are going to those schools already. The only difference is now they would have a little bit of taxpayer money to help with their child's, intuition, or I mean, their money to actually go to that school. So the tuition that it costs to go to a private school would actually be partially taxpayer money, our money.
Interesting. How are these voucher programs and charter schools actually diverting funding away from public schools? And how is this impacting low-income areas that will be even more underfunded if Project
So,
2025 and this goes through?
and that's a really good question that we as a state need to be having. We've seen decline in enrollment across the state, and we've seen traditional public ed have to react to that. And these are schools that predominantly take every child, which means kids with disabilities, kids that are English language learners. And so they have some of the most challenging and vulnerable kiddos in their district. And now they're having to close or consolidate. But I have concern when you have a charter that is a public school and it's part of your community, but when you're having this really tough decision and you have to, make these choices, they're not part of that discussion. And as a community, I think they should be. We should all be part of this because it is really hard. We see these consolidations and closings of schools in areas of poverty, areas where there seems to be a lot of kiddos of color. And so that is a concern. So it's taking away opportunities for our most vulnerable kids, along with, when we talk about vouchers, the way there's are not as many guardrails as we see in public ed right now. And so they can put in barriers so certain kids won't be able to go there. And so there's this continual conversation of it is every child's right to have a high quality public education. And that's what our tax money should be going for. And that access is extremely important. Vouchers go the other way. And we've already seen this play out in, I think you and I talked about it, John, in Arizona, where now they're actually coming forward and saying education is costing even more in that state than before they were doing vouchers. So it's not a money saver. This really is about people with a lot of money and a lot of affluency in their community trying to create situations where their child's private education is being paid for by taxpayers. And nobody is for that in Colorado. We definitely want choice, and we have that right now. We're going to continue that. That's not going away any place soon. It's not going away. But this is just a sneaky way of sneaking in that voucher when obviously we as Coloradoans have said no over and over again.
Wow. It sounds like this voucher program and this Amendment 80 would create inequality where students who need the most resources are left with the least while private institutions thrive. Absolutely insane. Proposition 138 and Project 2025 are cut from the same cloth. They're about defunding public schools and giving control to private interests. We'll talk more about the devastating impact after the break.
When I ran for Congress, we flipped more Trump voters blue than any other congressional race in the country. We did this by calling out the GOP's lies and speaking truth against their $1 million attack ads. I've now partnered with Turn Left, and we're taking the fight to the extremists like Marge the Trainwreck Green, Ted Cruz, and Josh Hawley, to name a few. And I'm asking each and every one of you all to donate $25 today to the group that is absolutely helping to send these jackaloons packing. It's time to speak truth to power and turn left.
Well, voucher programs sound good on paper, but in reality, they divert critical resources away from public education and into the hands of private institutions. This is particularly harmful for low income students who rely on public schools for their education. Rhonda, can you explain a little bit further how voucher programs like these being proposed under Project 2025, Amendment 80, will take away funding and resources from public education?
Well, and I think it's really important to state this. This is not a Democrat issue. This is going to affect our smaller communities, which tend to be even, conservative, but even our rural districts, which I have a lot in my district, which I represent, which is Congressional District 8. They don't support this either. They want to be able to have community schools and have community input and not have taxpayer money diverted from their rural schools. And they already struggle with resources. And so this just isn't a Democrat issue. This should be important to all people, and making sure that all kids have access to a high quality public education. And what we've seen in other states is, again, private institution raising their fees, and people who were already sending their kids to private school are the only ones that are really benefiting from a voucher program. They already can afford to go to private school. It's just now they're getting some tax money to kind of help with tuition. And so that should be a concern for all of us. And when you are profiting off of public education, something that is supposed to be a common good, where we are already seeing trouble with resources here in Colorado, we just got rid of the BS factor, which was years of our budget not being balanced. And so they're having to make cuts. And K-12 education was one of those areas that they kept cutting year after year after year, to where this just kept building up and building up the amount that they should be paying districts desperately need to make sure that kids are getting the education that they deserve. And so we're already underfunding our schools. Teachers are already being underpaid. So this will continue to bleed out a system that was really meant for all kids. And this attack is deliberate. And you and I have talked about this before, John, on your podcast, about the two equalizers in this nation are a public education and your right to vote. And we see Project 2025 attacking both of those rights. They don't want us to have equal access to voting. They don't want all of us to have a high quality education. They only want the top 1%. And we know who they are. We see them over and over again to benefit from these programs off of our backs. We are taxpayers, and most, middle class people actually pay more in taxes than some of these billionaires, which is just crazy. This, corporate tax breaks that they continually get are just crazy. And I think the American people are tired of it. And we need to band together as Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and make sure that we ensure that every person has the right to vote and every child has access to a high quality education. Those two things should be rights for everyone.
Indeed. Let's go ahead and shift the focus a little bit. There's been a lot of misinformation and fear mongering about issues like transgender students in sports. How do these unfounded claims that are going around combine with the push for voucher programs and damage the educational environment, shifting away from the real needs of students?
Well, when I was first getting into politics, I had a friend, a mentor of mine that I would meet with probably almost weekly. And we would talk about politics, the landscape, who's who, and it just kind of how you navigate the system. And it was really interesting to me because he told me, especially people that are like behind Project 2025, their whole game plan is fear, smear, and queer. Those are their three go-tos. So they want to make sure that they demolish whoever they're going after, public ed. They want to make sure that they smear them in any way possible and telling people that education is, failing. And then queer, we see these issues come up time and time again. We don't have a high percentage of transgendered kiddos in districts. Do they exist? Yes. Have they always existed? Yes. We've seen this in Native American culture when it comes to two spirits. This isn't anything that's been new in our communities. The only difference is, like every other issue, if we can bring that to the forefront where people have interaction and more knowledge and more interpersonal relationships and actually know someone, it kind of changes how our view is of them, and they're not so scary. It's not this, horrendous thing. And what we're doing as a society is we're going through growing pains where we acknowledge who's all part of our country, whether it's a different religion, whether it's a different ethnicity, whether they come from a different type of family. There's lots of different things that we bring as humans from our own experiences and where we came from. And that's probably what I love about traditional public ed, is that kids at their most innocent time of being a human are exposed to differences. And I think that's important to do, because as we send them out into the world, whether it's in the military, whether it's on a college campus, whether it's in the workforce, that is the world that they're going to go into. And, we have always had gay people in my family. We just maybe didn't talk about it as openly. And what they're saying is, we want to be open. We want it to be okay. We want people to see us and be seen. And that's what everybody wants. And so I think it's time that we start having these conversations in realistic ways of, there's not kids that are being turned trans in K-12. They're not Teachers are not, helping get operations on kids that want to change who they are. None of that is happening. But there are some conversations for kids that are struggling with who they are, where they are, and who they want to be. And I think that's part of growing. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge and we are open to the differences that we all have. And I impart with, like other people, I've had some learning curves around pronouns and things like that. So I continue to put myself in circles of knowledge of learning and making sure that I'm being respectful and that I know what, the best way to approach people. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or, make anyone feel uncomfortable. But this is a learning process. There is a learning curve to it. So along with us having accepting conversations, I think there is some grace that we also need to have with one another as we're learning these things. So I think it's a mutual thing, and it's not as scary and dangerous and huge as people are making it, but because it can cause fear and it's something that could be a tool that's used, that's why we see it.
Absolutely. It's like those types of accusations are distractions from the real issues. I remember going to school. I remember not feeling all that great a couple of times and having to go to the nurse's office. And it wasn't an easy process to get something like for an upset stomach or maybe an aspirin or something like that. I can tell you they certainly did not have an operating room or any type of facilities that would play into these just outrageous allegations and things like that. Um, and I believe that by pushing away these false narratives and focusing on this fear mongering, they're shifting attention away from the lack of funding, support, and resources that schools truly need to serve all students, especially those who are most vulnerable.
And, I just want to make sure that I say that, we do have some Republicans, Democrats, and independents that really do want kids to do well in school. And we have some communities across the state that we see people working together to make sure that their local school districts are really achieving and that their kids are doing well. and they're not really buying into this. It's just kind of this fringe area that's causing chaos and havoc. But communities, this isn't what's on their mind. They're wanting to make sure that they're, helping their kids to be able to have a future after K-12 ed, that, there's housing that's going to be available, our jobs going to be available. All of those things are on the minds of everyday Americans. It's not this stuff. This is just a distraction and a way to divide us. And we all need to stand together and say, no, we're not doing that. We all care about kids. There's going to be some certain situations in our communities that we're going to have to deal with. And luckily, Colorado has local control. And we're going to do that. We are going to address those. And some of it's going to be uncomfortable. And some of it's going to be some growing pains. But you know what? That's what we do as humans. And we progress and we get better. We become better humans.
Outstanding. Absolutely. Voucher programs are not a solution. They're a corporate attack on public education. And with Project 2025's push for these programs, the future of public schooling is at serious risk. We're going to come back and talk about the long-term effects of public education with these programs after the break.
Today, we have an amazing show for you. Join myself, special guests, and celebrities. What's going on, Ice-T? Andrew Yang. Somebody else was hopping on. Oh, hold on.
What's going on, Battle?
As we roast GQP Jackaloons. He may not be a real businessman, but he is one hell of a con artist. That's what it is. That's what they got indicted for. Treason and sedition. And addresses the headlines of the day. They must be held accountable. Live streaming every night. I got more time in a friggin' port in a friggin' combat zone than you probably got in the military. This is Ojeda Live.
So what happens if Amendment 80 passes and Project 2025 succeeds in dismantling the Department of Education? Public schools will be gutted, especially in poor communities, and the most vulnerable students will be left without any options. Rhonda, what would public schools look like if plans like Amendment 80 and Project 2025 succeed?
So, what we have seen in other states, John, is that the gap between the haves and the have nots widen, which is totally the opposite of what we have been trying to do in public education. And that's closing those gaps, especially with certain groups, whether it's kids with disabilities, different minority groups, all of English language learners, all of that has been our work across the nation of trying to make those gaps smaller, not bigger. But the experiments have already happened in states like Arizona, and we've seen that gap widen between the haves and the have-nots, and we've seen education be more expensive. And I really worry about our rural schools that already struggle. Putting something in place like this, for many of them, they don't even have private schools. So you're going to see larger cities and areas where private schools could really, really make some money. And that money is going to be diverted from rural schools to the city where all these private institutions are. And so our rural kiddos are going to struggle even more. And we have some amazing kids and families in our rural schools. We just had the state fair here, and there were some kids that brought cattle and stuff to show and sell. And I'm just amazed. It's not a world that I get to be part of a lot. So when I learned how hard these kids work and how much money they can get for a cow that they raised, I'm just astonished. But these are values that have gone over and over in generations in these small communities. And you're talking about entrepreneur skills. These kids are smart. We need to not take more stuff away from them. We need to be partnering with them to make sure that they have all that they need to continue doing the great work that they do.
Absolutely. We must be there for our students in rural areas and especially in poor communities. Um, Rhonda, how dangerous is it when political agendas take over student welfare? As we're seeing with initiatives like Project 2025, what advice do you have for parents and educators who want to protect their schools from these harmful influences?
Well, the one thing we don't really talk about when it comes to public ed and what our responsibilities are is that we're also helping create citizens. These people are going to, leave K-12 ed, go into workforce, military, college, and if we keep pulling apart, like the haves and the have-nots, or if we keep pulling kids apart by abilities or specialties, that is dangerous to all of us because we have some really tough issues to tackle. And it takes all of us. And we need to figure out how we work together to actually solve this. Otherwise, we're going to continue seeing the 1% gaining everything, having everything, and things being even more tougher for the middle class and people below the middle class. And I'm talking housing, I'm talking about jobs, I'm talking about food, I'm talking about grocery stores in their neighborhoods. This pushes that divide between the haves and the have-nots, not just in education, but economically, and that affects communities, that affects states, that affects our nation. We need well-educated kids who have been exposed to a lot of differences, that know how to work well together and agree to disagree on some things, but how do we solve these big, tough problems? And what we've seen when it comes to anything that lives is when they work together, that's when they're successfully, and that's when they're successful and they're able to survive. The other way of it's mine, what's mine, what am I losing, who's taking it from me, that mentality is not going to be helpful for us at all as we have big issues to solve together that affect us all. We are interconnected, whether we like it or not, and we have got to figure out a way to work better in solving these big issues and not let big money, big corporations, and people with power divide us and create these situations where we're fighting amongst ourselves while they continue to have all the money and all the privilege that they already have.
Rhonda, thank you for sharing your insights. As we said at the beginning, to protect public education, we must actively resist Amendment 80 and Project 2025. Here are some steps that you can take today to do just that. Visit turnleftpac.org and sign up for our email alerts. You'll get updates on how to get involved, from attending local school board meetings to volunteering in campaigns that support public education. You can also find guides on how to speak out against voucher programs and privatization in your own community. Amendment 80 and Project 2025's voucher programs would defund public schools, take resources from the poorest communities, and funnel them into unaccountable charter schools. This is not choice, this is destruction. We are here to make sure that doesn't happen. Share this video, tag someone who must hear the truth in the comments, like and subscribe, and stay tuned next for Ojeda Live.